Hello. Hello, Jason. JG.
Hello. How are
Welcome
you?
to the show.
Yeah, well, I hope it's a welcome back to the show.
Oh
Even though
gosh, sorry.
the show has changed, but you are still lovely, and that's all that matters.
Oh, thank you so much. In fact, I think you could be one of the few guests that's probably been with us through all three of our iterations. I think you first came on the Born Happy show
Yep.
and the Primal Happiness show, and now the Wake in the Wild show.
Wow, that's true. It's been is this my third time back?
I think it's more than that, but I think you are so far the only guest that's been on all three.
Well, it just shows your commitment to charity. I love that about you. So thank you for that. I hope there's something alcoholic in that cup. You're going to need it. Yeah.
So, my dear, I think it got to a point where it's just like, let's just hit record before we just spend any longer reminiscing. Yep. But I couldn't even remember how we first came to know each other or even when it was. But what I do know is even in the time that we've known each other, which is maybe like 7 years, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is something around there. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So in the time that we've known each other, you've had, huge amounts of change. And then you also had come already. I remember the very first show we did together, you were sharing kind of, again, a big story of like personal transformation. So what I feel like would be delightful is if you wouldn't mind, like, kind of like we do it in an act of 3 parts. So sharing a bit about that kind of like, don't go back to the beginning of time, but perhaps that kind of initial before and after transformation. And then perhaps going back a few years. And as you were just saying, the last time we spoke, you think is when you were still married and living in LA. Did you say you were then?
I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina back then. Yeah.
Ah, yes. Yep. And then moved to the present. But the real focus, I was sharing with you some of the real hard choices and changes that we've been in over the last few months, and really looking at through that lens, because it can be so easy to look at people whose life you admire or envy from the outside and think, oh, it must be so lovely to have this, that, or the other, and not really see those, sometimes almost seemingly impossible choices and the consequences that we need to be with along the way. So Act 1.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah. So Act 1. So it all started as when I was a blink in my father's eye. And no, I'm just kidding. So I actually, it is relevant though to talk about that very briefly, is that I was born to a single mother, only child, and it was always just the two of us. My dad left her as soon as she got pregnant. He gave her an ultimatum. He's like, I don't want kids. Either get an abortion or I'm leaving. She called his bluff. And I always say my dad was a professional magician. As soon as he found out that my mom was pregnant, he disappeared and never came back. And so the reason that's relevant is that means from an early age, being that it was just my mom and I was exposed to things, and people can say for better or for worse, like, should kids know about adult problems? Should they be shielded from that? That debate can go on for years. But I was not shielded from it. I saw all the things. So I saw my mom in her sadness. I saw her in her anxiety. I saw her in her stress. I saw her in all the things that anybody who's a single mom trying to raise a little rambunctious kid would go through. But not knowing how to manage or navigate that at that time, and her not being a fantastic model of that because she was never taught how to navigate it herself, I grew up living from circumstance, right? If something good happens, I'm happy. If something bad happens, I'm sad. And because I didn't want the sad emotions, nobody, wants the sad emotions. We're not talking about the highly spiritual, evolved levitators, but for the rest of us, we don't typically love the presence of sadness. And so we do something to cope with it, whether it's sadness, depression, anxiety, whatever it is. And for me, that became food. And food became the way that I coped. And so if I had a stressful day at work, that would be permission to binge on a bunch of, unhealthy foods. If I was sad, if I was bored, if I was lonely, if I was anxious, food was the coping mechanism. And so that led me to, from a very young age, become kind of the chunky kid. From first grade, I was kind of already the chunky kid. By the time I was 15, I was 250 pounds. And then by the time I was in my late 20s, I was 332 pounds. And that was the height of my weight. And so that, that led to even more. It was this cycle for me of realizing that not only was I carrying around this physical weight, but I was also carrying around all kinds of other types of weight, right? The emotional weight and the mental weight and the financial weight, worrying about money, worrying about the future, worrying about everything. And then realizing that the more overweight I became in those ways, the longer it caused me to wait, W-A-I-T, to go do and be the things that I wanted to be in the world. So now I'm overweight, W-E-I-G-H-T, and overweight, W-A-I-T, and it's a self-propagating loop. The longer I waited, the heavier I felt. The heavier I felt, the longer I waited. And so that led to me being, what I call being kind of a prisoner of circumstance. And that kind of is what took me into, through my IT career and into being an entrepreneur. But that kind of was the first major inflection point for me, was really getting to the root of where did this need to consume and cope with food come from? And how do I, quote, lose the weight, both types of weight, so I can actually experience more happiness?
Thank you. I feel like I've heard some of that for the first time. I don't know if that's the case or not, but yeah, I really got the kind of image of like the way the weight actually does, like create that sense of I can't move forward, literally weighing you down. Really makes sense.
Yeah.
And something that I don't know if I'm going to say this in the best way, but I'm just going to trust however it comes out. I think something that I certainly don't feel that I fully appreciated about you until I think just I was pondering just before this call, and I was thinking, because you have this, larger than life personality and the humor, and I was like, you also got real brilliance, really smart guy. And it was just occurring to me how when that's been, and I'm guessing, you had an IT career and you were so used to that being the way you navigated the world, like from your intellect, and as you say, not being able to kind of really be in contact with what your body and your heart were telling you, because it was like just numbing it out. And I was curious, do you see now, looking back, or perhaps when you are working with people, how that, those of us that have got, a brain that we can rely on, how it can actually take longer to start to look at what we're missing, the parts of us that kind of not having an opportunity to help us navigate our lives?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I love creativity. Creativity is one of my favorite things, and in the traditional and non-traditional senses, all things creation and creativity based. And I very much believe that creativity is greater than circumstance. That any problem overwhelmed with enough creativity can be solved, or at least navigated through. But I will say, in what you just said, really brought this up for me. Really helped me to even crystallize this for myself. Is that I think creativity, without a lack of introspection, is a recipe for disaster. Because my creativity, my imagination can create the worst scenarios in the world, or can also help me to rationalize distracting away from pain, or staying in my head, or going to eat the thing instead of looking at my actual feelings. And the more creative and intelligent and intellectual I am, the more excuses I can come up with that really make sense. So I think it's keep the creativity, but unless we have the introspection to go with it, the creativity may lead us down a not so healthy path.
Yeah, that really makes sense. So what for you changed? How did you shift from that, what we're calling act one, into act two?
Yeah, so I had this kind of moment. So I was in IT consulting for the better part of 15 years. When I ended my consulting career, I was a director of engineering and operations for a tech firm that was based in Florida. And so I had this moment, and it's the first chapter of my book, Prison Break. And the chapter is called "The Day the Universe Cut Me Off." And it was when I had this experience, and I won't go deep into the story just for in the interest of time, but I had this moment where essentially my bank cut me off from access to my own funds in my account, because there was some potentially fraudulent activity on the account. And the fraudulent activity was that there were 4 fast food transactions that had occurred in one day. And their system flagged that as potentially fraudulent, because I guess some people, if they steal credit cards, they'll go make small purchases to test the card before they make a big purchase. And that was the day where it was like, holy crap, this multi-billion-dollar bank has cut me off from my own money because of my decisions, because of the choices I've been making. And so people say, oh my gosh, was that like, was that the wake up call that you knew something needed to change? I'm like, I was 332 pounds and massively depressed. I knew that something was off, right? This was not a wake-up call. This was the 400th wake-up call I had, right? Quote, wake-up call. And I just kept hitting snooze, right? I wasn't into it. I would always find, again, that creative minus introspection. I'd always find a way to dodge it. For some reason, and this is something I can't point to, there's no like, I wish I had a practice to help people with, or a tool or a framework. I don't know why. For some reason, this day when this happened, it was the first time I can remember where I couldn't find someone else to blame. I'd gotten so good at living from the mantra, two mantras. I had two very spiritual mantras back then. Number one was, who can I blame? And number two was, that's just the way I am, right? What I call my 6-word death sentence. That's just the way I am. And so for some reason in that moment, I couldn't find anybody. It wasn't my team members who were, idiots. It wasn't my boss who was too demanding. It wasn't my clients who were, a pain in the ass. It wasn't my genetics. It wasn't because my mom didn't cook for me. It wasn't any of those things. It was personal responsibility that was missing. And so that became my opening to try to bring in that piece that I was missing, the introspection, to actually face the thing I had been running from. And that became my entry point into personal growth. So I didn't even pick up a personal growth book until I was 29 years old. It was the first time I ever touched it, which is beautiful now when I see like 18-year-olds who are already going to seminars, and I'm like, God, if I had done that, I don't even know where my life would be. So that became the thing where it was like, in technology, we have to get very good at reverse engineering, right? We look at what people have done or what technology has done. We reverse engineer it so that we can build it again for somebody else, especially in consulting. So I kind of brought that approach to this. I said, well, there are people out there that I know personally, and people who are like, famous, who have their stories out there, that have been through objectively worse stuff than me. And we're not comparing traumas. You can drown in 8 feet of water or 8 inches of water, right? So it's not about comparing. But to me, objectively, they have been through way worse things than I have been through. And they didn't seem to have the same level of darkness or sadness or anxiety that I did. And so I wanted to figure out, can I reverse engineer joy? Can I reverse engineer happiness? And so that was really how I started making that first initial move from living at circumstance to instead living from more self-leadership.
Yeah, I love the way you not named it this way, but a kind of system thinking into, okay, how do I reverse engineer how people do feel these things? I had the opposite story in that, and I probably shared this with you before, when my father died, I was kind of just like blown open to this just depth of connection and love and meaning. And for me, it was like reverse engineering, like, how did and it wasn't I was depressed or anything before that. I was just not really living as I'm meant to live. And so similarly, I was like, trying to reverse engineer, like, what happened? Why did that happen? Which, in some ways I'm still like, even in the last couple of weeks, I kind of found another clue. That's like 10 years, literally 10 years exactly later. But I think those of us that are system thinkers, it's so interesting how we can even tell, often that's thought of as like, oh, it only has a place in, say, engineering or IT. And yet, it can also be turned to the philosophical, the spiritual. Obviously not as spiritual as my statement earlier, like we can either travel or have dogs.
That was a brilliant spiritual distinction, by the way. Let's not trivialize how deep that was. Okay, man, that was amazing. I had a breakthrough on that.
Right there.
I had a major breakthrough on that. So thank you for the breakthrough.
Distracted myself now. So
but you're right though, those things do keep coming up. Like you will get little things, right? And it'll be the moment you think you're through the thing, right? And you've healed the thing, something else will come up. And that's why I really try to impart this on as many people as possible, at least the way that I work. And I hope it's the way most coaches work, but I can't speak for most coaches, is that the work that I do with people and on myself is not about immunity from life. It's about how to navigate life. Right. And so if my goal is, I'm going to learn the practices, I'm going to reverse engineer so I never experience anxiety or sadness again, I'm setting myself up for failure. Right. Because now I'm trying to numb the core essence of what is part of the human condition, what is part of the human experience. So instead it's about navigation. So when I know it's about navigation, the reason I'm bringing this up is that when those things pop back up, it still sucks. It still stings. I don't want these things to keep coming up, but I know how to navigate them and to welcome them in way better than I did when I was, in my 20s struggling like that.
Absolutely. Can you remember, you were saying you didn't pick up kind of any self-help material or anything until you're 29. Can you remember that first book that you read?
Yeah, 100%. I will remember it for the rest of my life because it was Think and Grow Rich, right? Because somebody told me like, that's the book you want to read. If you're getting into personal growth, that's the book you want to read. So I'm reading the book and my memory of it, and I haven't gone back to read it since. And now it's been, I don't know, 14 years or something. When I go back and think about that book, I hated the book. And the reason I hated the book was a perfect mirror of what my life looked like, is that he kept pointing to something, quote something, he called it a secret in the book. And he kept saying like, by now you can probably see the secret that I'm pointing to. And I'm like, what are you just telling me the fucking secret? What are you just, this is a book in print. I can't talk to you. It's not real time. You do realize that this is immortalized on paper. Just tell me the damn thing. And it was because the thing he was pointing to was the role of thought in our experience, right? Now, he didn't say it that way, and I don't think he meant it to the depth of the way you and I might talk about it, or maybe I shouldn't say depth, but the lens through which we might talk about it. But it was so foreign to me that my thinking could be anything other than reality, that it just blew past me. And so it didn't actually land for me when I first read it. And so I always remember that. And it's a great thing. The reason I think that's great to remember is because sometimes on the path, you will feel lost. I have felt lost plenty of times. And I don't mean in the beginning when I was new to this, I mean like Tuesday, right? Where that it just feels, it feels that way. And so it's really important just to understand that if you feel lost on the path, that's a part of the path, and just to stick with that.
Yes. Yeah, totally. I was just thinking, I'm pretty sure there may have been other books prior to this that I perhaps didn't really realize, like Jonathan Livingston's Seagull. It actually is a very kind of deep spiritual book. And I read that when I was much younger, but I don't think I actually realized its deeper meaning. I think I thought it was a book about a seagull.
I thought it was a book about Flock of Seagulls, the band from the 80s, but I guess I was wrong too.
I think the first like real self-help book I read was Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. There's probably some kind of like personality profile you could do by like the first self-help book that someone reads.
Oh, I'm sure there's something in there. I mean, yeah, if you pick Think and Grow Rich, you're a narcissist. Like, what? Somebody recommended it to me. What's not my fault?
Exactly. So does it feel right now? Like, let's move into the future, which is now our past. When you and I last connected, I said, oh, I remember you used to have that orange wall behind you. And so I feel like we've kind of explored some of the changes that you experienced that brought you to that point, which, you know, to most people looking at you at that point, you would be living this really successful life, a creative life, making an impact, and it's a very different life between then and now. So would you share some of what's created that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I had the IT career, the weight thing happened. And then I did go through and was able to lose 130 pounds. Part of that was using the tool of bariatric surgery, which is a whole other conversation about identity and how worried I was about that getting out and people finding out and thinking that I was weak or I took the easy way out because they don't really know and all these things. And so that was one part of the journey, and that had a lot of inner stuff that came up as a part of that, right? Changing the identity from, this 332 into this other man, and still noticing that there was all still that emotional weight and stuff I had to still work on. That didn't come off with the physical weight. They're separate and yet together. And so I finally ended up leaving my consulting career, had a couple of other startups. One was a transportation startup, and another one was a technology commercialization startup in partnership with NASA and the space shuttle program. But through all of that, I was diving deeper into personal growth and getting coached and like doing all these things and feeling the difference. And so I really felt this desire to be able to do that with and for other people. The same way, if you go to a restaurant that just has the best meal ever, you go tell all your friends, you got to go try this restaurant. I said the best steak of my life, right? Unless they're weird vegans, and then you send them somewhere else. So
remember, I'm one of those weird vegans, but it's all good.
I still love you. I say weird as an endearing compliment.
I know.
So it just became something that I really wanted to do, but I didn't. So by the time you and I were talking, I had gone into the coaching and the speaking, doing all that stuff. And I had this real eagerness and positivity and all, all about possibilities and just feeling all the things. And it was because it was new, right? And it was new and it was exciting. And then if you fast forward through, and we can go back to any of the pieces here that you want to dive deeper into, but if you fast forward through, I noticed that the more my career trajectory started rising as a coach and as a speaker, and my book came out and all these things, I noticed that a lot of the fun factor was disappearing. And I was still helping other people find their fun. I could externalize my own pain and healing all day, but doing it for myself was really a challenge, like to get myself in this place. And it was so interesting because I notice now for sure, when I lose sight of play, when I take things too seriously, and when I make it about me, all of this becomes just as stressful and debilitating as my technology consulting career. There's literally no difference. You could put me back in that job and I wouldn't feel any different at all. And so it has been a very purposeful thing for me to understand, because I watched this from the outside, and it's kind of a tangent, but not so much. I watched from the outside. I would see these people when I got started who were like really big, like, multi 7-figure businesses, huge profiles, all these things. And then I would see things they were doing, or I would hear things they were doing, like in their paid programs behind the scenes, that felt really out of integrity. Right. And this is not to judge.
Would you give an example?
You
don't have to give a personal, you don't
no, of course,
names, but just an example of what you mean.
Kind of like a bait and switch kind of thing, right? So like promising one thing, and then once they join, it's not what they expected at all. And then when they bring that up to whoever the person was, the person says, well, this is your shadow coming up. This is your whatever. And then it just becomes all about that person, and it's spiritually bypassing, and it's gaslighting, and it's terrible. But the reason I bring that up is because what it showed me was, oh, you know what? I can see where when you get really big, and now you have a big team and you have a huge nut to crack, and you got to make a certain amount of money, and you got to keep growing because people are watching you, all these things. I could see how it could be easy to start cutting some corners, or to be a little bit out of integrity, but kind of rationalize it because, I got all these people that I have to pay their salaries. And so we just got to make it work. And I vowed to myself, I don't care how big my business gets, I will never do that. I will never compromise on my integrity. What I didn't do was the same thing with play and joy and fun and lightness. Right. I didn't
yes.
that perspective. Right. And so I started losing myself a bit in that practice, where I got into the same spot where I wasn't cutting corners on integrity. That was something that I always kept, but I was cutting corners on negotiating with my soul about the work that I was doing in the world, and not being in full alignment, and trying to force myself to do something that didn't feel like it was in alignment.
Yeah, this feels like such an important conversation. I'm sure you've been aware of kind of a lot of the stuff that's been going on in the coaching world at the moment is kind of, people saying it's smoke and mirrors, and then this, which I don't really want to get into. But I think some of what you're saying here is in a way, I'm not, just be clear, I'm not saying you were out of integrity, but in a way, if our work is about, play and creativity, and yet we're living a life which is kind of a slave to money, a slave to status, we are out of integrity, actually.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Jonathan and I have also been so aware of over the years, particularly as a big aspect of our work for, years now has been around rewilding connection to the wild. And, and then as our business gets more and more successful, there's more and more kind of reason to be, glued to the screen and all those things. And you're like, that's out of integrity. And so I think this goes so much deeper than, how you run your business. It's actually how you live your life.
Yeah. And that's the real challenging part, because when it comes to integrity, that's like one of my top 3 kind of core values. When it comes to integrity, I found personally, it was much easier to be in integrity to others than it was to be in integrity to myself. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's another one of those, like, creativity without introspection. It's like, oh, of course I'm in integrity. Look, everybody that's counting on me is getting what they counted on me for. But what about the source who's actually delivering the thing? Is that person in integrity with themselves? And so that was what I had to do and really face myself in 2021 in particular. I mean, it's always an introspection to have, but particularly in 2021, where I think it was partly COVID. Even in COVID, I another distinction here: leadership versus martyrdom. I thought that I was in leadership because I was trying to serve so many people during COVID, and giving away my program Playful Prosperity to 500 people and doing live calls with them and just trying to support them the best I could. It wasn't even a money thing; it was literally just a support thing, and being like, this is what a leader does. Like, I'm showing up in leadership for my community. I'm being of service. And completely neglected myself. And so then I became a martyr when I thought I was a leader, right? So it's these little checkpoints of really checking in.
I've had one of those recently, and it's how convincing it, like, no, whether we use the distinction like I'm sovereign or a leader or creator, and it's just like, no, I absolutely am. And then it's like the penny drops, and it's like, oh my goodness, I've been victimized about my leadership.
That's what it feels like. That's totally what it feels like. I totally get you on that. It's what I was feeling. And so then going into 2021, and I was already experiencing the thing that I needed to really check in from an integrity standpoint. I was already feeling that in 20, maybe towards the end of 2019, but not as much. Definitely into 2020, I was feeling it. Actually, no, I was feeling it in 2019. Now that I think about it, it was the end of 2019 when it started to feel heavier. And so fast forward to 2021, I had to make a really tough decision because I realized that I was forcing myself to do something. And this is not like, when people say that, oh, your business should be all flow and everything should feel effortless all the time. I'm like, if there are people that live that way, fantastic. I think that's amazing. That's not been my experience, that's how it has to work. It can maybe for some people. It's never been my experience. So what I mean by that is, like, there are things in my business that I'm not a fan of. Like, I don't love invoicing. I don't love doing like certain admin things. Like, there are things I don't love, but it was okay because it serves the greater purpose of me being able to do whatever it is that I want to do. But when I started noticing the things that were core to the business, like, let's say the marketing or even a bit of the delivery, but it was more the marketing. Delivery I still enjoyed because I was still impacting and coaching and doing whatever. But like the marketing of it and the managing the team and doing all these things, I realized it all felt like a push. And at first, what I tried was this thing, and this was something recommended to me by my coach. And I think it's a great kind of lens to look through things that maybe feel stale or stagnant, or you think they may be out of alignment, is to ask yourself, number one, should I be doing something different? Or number two, should I be doing the thing I'm doing now differently? Right. Mm-hmm. And so the easier thing was to try the second one first, right? How can I do it differently to see if it's still there? I tried the differently as much as possible, and it still felt heavy and it still felt out of alignment. But to release that was to, at that point, releasing that part of my business also meant releasing 80 to 85% of my revenue, like literally this one thing. So now it's a logistical, as in
like an asset, like a program, let's say, or is it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was so I ran like this one particular group program, like a higher ticket group program for 5 years. And that's what I got burnt out on running, because it was a rolling thing. It never stopped. It just kept going always. Right. And there are good and bad parts of that, but regardless. So that was why I was feeling the burnout. And so, I just got to this point where I said, I can keep trying to push through this. I can keep trying, different techniques and different things or whatever, but when does it end? Like, is there some end goal? Like, oh, once you make this much money, then you'll feel safe enough. That never happens.
Oh, yes.
And so I had to sit down. I had to sit down and just say, like, it's what am I crowding out by keeping this thing at the front of my mind? What am I not allowing to come through because of my fear of releasing this thing because of money? And even more so, I didn't realize it was more so until I did the introspection part, releasing the identity of the person that has this program that makes X amount of dollars per month and serves this many people and is recognized by this group or is talked about by these people. Releasing that identity was like, holy crap, to your point from before, like, new thing came up, right? I thought I released the identity of needing to be seen in a certain way in order to feel successful. I thought I released that ages ago, and yet here we are. And so just facing that identity part was actually huge.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Would you share a little bit more, a bit more of the emotional experience of those things that were clear you needed to let go of? And you say there's the program, but then there's the identity, the money, all those things. Would you share some of what that felt like for you? And also, again, I was sharing with you, we've had some big changes at Waking the Wild in the last month, which were unexpected as well. It's, you know, similarly for us, it was just this very clear thing, like, this is no longer in alignment, this is. And I don't think I'd actually anticipated like how difficult it would be emotionally. I'd had kind of some sense of like, oh my goodness, you know, it's going to require this and this. And it wasn't until the actually, you know, being in like real intimacy with the consequences, I realized it really probably has been one of the hardest parts of all these years in business emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And is that I just don't think is easy to see from the outside unless we're willing to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. For me, it was very much how can I say this? I didn't have a lot of people, and I don't know if this is your experience with this particular thing you're talking about. A lot of people, when they do something like that, when they release something or say that this is just not in alignment anymore, it's because they have an idea of what is in alignment instead, right? Mm. I did not at that moment. So releasing this was not only releasing the identity, releasing the income, releasing the whatever, it was also met with really not having a lot of creative energy or even hope of what the next thing was going to be. The burnout will do that to you as well, right? It just takes away your creative energy. Yeah. And so for me, there was this kind of piece of, am I willing to experience the discomfort of not knowing long enough for the energy to clear from this thing and for space to be open for the next thing? And as somebody who, and this is not just people who are in technology, but as somebody who is in technology, if you were in any work, any career that you were paid to know the answer, which is 99.9% of careers, the phrase "I don't know" doesn't fly. I don't know is you don't get paid for "I don't know," right? You get paid for "I know," or I'm going to figure it out within the next 30 minutes so my boss doesn't get pissed off at me. So when you build your confidence through having a guaranteed competence, right? By knowing the path, if your confidence comes from knowing the path, and now you're confronted with a situation where you can't know the path, that is also confronting to your identity or to mine. And so that became the thing, is like, am I willing to have the experience of not knowing as long as I need to in order for space to be opened up for something to show up? And then my mind came, no, but you need a plan. You need to at least have this. Okay, maybe if you had just a bullet point list of it, and it was like, no, hold on a second. I get it. That's the way we've typically always done it. And this is not a terminal situation where if I release this thing and then I take a few months and nothing shows up and I'm worried about money, doesn't mean I couldn't go back and bring that program up again. It doesn't mean I couldn't, focus on one-on-one, like whatever it was. Like it's not like I didn't have some other path I could take. So if I can just suspend my disbelief that something else could possibly actually work out for me long enough to allow something to occur, it happens. And the funny thing is that literally within 2 days of me making that decision, I hadn't even done it yet. 2 days of making that decision, the next thing showed up like immediately. So I hadn't even released it yet, but just the intention and the commitment to the universe, or whatever you want to say, did something to say, okay, it's almost like the hostage negotiation. If you send out 2 hostages, it's like goodwill, then we'll send in pizzas for you and the rest of the group, right? It was kind of like that. I released the hostage and the universe said, okay, well, here's a little idea that will make you a little happy for now.
What makes me laugh is I'm about to ask you.
Hostage taking is hilarious, Leanne. We all know that hostage taking is one of the funniest things on the planet.
Asking this really like beautiful spiritual question, and then you did that.
Yeah, you can count on me to always devolve any spiritual conversation, I promise.
What I was about to ask you was, you did a bit almost like a throwaway line there. You said something like, I can't remember how you said it, but almost like when you, what do you remember what you said just before you said the word universe? It's like when you like make a deal with the universe, or you,
yeah, when you kind of show your commitment. Yeah, when you show your commit, I don't remember exactly what I said either, but I have terrible memory. What's your name again? When you make some kind of, you take some kind of action that shows a commitment to what it is you say you actually want, right? This is essentially the end. This was the end of me negotiating with my soul. That's what it really was.
Yeah, that's it. And over the years, for me personally, and it's a strange one to say this, given the path I'm on now started 10 years ago in about the most sort of spiritual fashion. In a bizarre way, though, it's taken so many twists and turns. And in the last few years, it feels like I've kind of gone much deeper into an understanding. Like we can have so many ideas of, oh, this is what creates, whatever word you want to give, success and impact and happiness. And over the years, I feel like I've been really humbled how much is actually out of my hands, in a good way, and it feels as though this would be a really, like, I feel like we've been having a conversation at a kind of more human level, which is wonderful, beautiful, but I'd really love to know more about when you're saying universe, what does that mean to you, and where has that like played a role in kind of from your understanding of like showing you what's next, showing what's in or out of alignment? I'd love to know.
Yeah, so it came to me through coaching, actually, through being coached in a session one time, that, and I had no idea this was my belief, that I believed in a higher power, God, universe, whatever it is. I believed in something bigger than all of us, but I didn't believe it had my back. And that was I didn't realize those two things could coexist. How do you believe in an almighty who also doesn't back you up? Why would I be excluded from that? But the way that manifested was, well, if it's going to happen, it has to be up to me. I have to make it all happen. And if I don't make it all happen, I don't control every single bit of it, it's not going to happen. I can't count on anybody else. I can't count on anything else. It has to be done for me. And so my kind of developing more of spirituality is to lean more into faith. And again, faith is right in line with the saying, I don't know, when you're in an IT consulting role, right? Again, you don't walk into a multi-million-dollar project and they say, what's your plan? And you say faith. That doesn't fly so well, right? So faith wasn't something that I ever had. Faith like in something bigger that would have my back. And then I had this really incredible experience that I will never forget. I was in a psilocybin ceremony, mushroom ceremony, a sound ceremony, really deep, intense one, like a 5 or 6 hour journey. And I had this moment, it was so funny. I had this moment where I'm in it, and all of a sudden I see this image in my head, and it's a bunch of people that look just like me and you. They don't look spiritual. They don't look angelic. Regular people, me and you, same kind of age range, around our age, dressed in very normal attire. And I'm just watching all them. And at some point they all turn like almost in unison. They're talking to each other. They're just like living their lives. And they all turn in unison and look at me and they go, you can see us? And I said, yeah, who are you? They're like, oh, we're your spirit guides. We're the ones up here, like helping to orchestrate all the stuff that you think you're doing on your own down there. And it occurred to me in that moment, I was like, holy shit, I'm a terrible boss. Like all I ever do is complain that things aren't happening fast enough, or why didn't this go right? Or why didn't this go my way? And this preference isn't being met. And this should be a different way than it is. Meanwhile, you guys are up here trying your best to make things, the best it can be for me. And I'm just fighting against you. So my commitment to you is to be more grateful, to be more hands-off, to have more faith in you, and being able to put faces to this faceless thing. It really shifted something for me. And I really started believing in something higher, a higher power that actually had my back, and not in an arrogant, like I'm so important, it has my back, but in a, we're all connected. And in the same way water flows down in a forest in Asia, water also flows down in a forest in America, right? Nature kind of has it figured out. And so it was me just kind of allowing more of nature to do its thing. Still very much a challenge for me to do on a regular basis. It's an intentional thing I have to continue anchoring into, but that's been the big shift for me when it comes to spirituality.
Oh, I really love that story. Thank you. Really, thank you so much for sharing that. So there's this might sound as a bizarre example, but there's sometimes where people share experiences like that, and it feels as though it's kind of for all of us, like it's not just for you. That was for all of us that hear that story. And it put me in mind of, this is the bit that's going to sound a bit weird. A
Did you hear
doctor
my story that I just told you, and you're
I
worried about what you're
did.
saying being weird? Okay.
Yeah, but you wait to hear the comparison. It's a doctor that studied near-death experiences. That's why I was like, it's going to sound like a weird comparison. But there's something so beautiful in hearing his stories of all these different people who he studied that have had near-death experiences, and just listening to him gave me this sense of, like just that another doorway opening into something greater, and your story did that for me too. So really, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So we are, I think, coming up on time. This has gone in all sorts of places I wasn't expecting. So
I kind of figured it would. I felt like with us, it probably would go in a bunch of different directions, but in a good way. And I think that was good.
Yeah, yes. So what do you feel would be, so going back to our intention for this, which was about making those kind of hard choices that we know are in alignment, and yet come at a cost, and then we have to like be with the cost, and people can look at us from the outside and think, it's all just amazing and wonderful. And again, I think having conversations like this are really important to show this is what it requires. It requires all of this. And that word faith that you brought in, I think is a really important one. Is there anything else that you can now see, talking about, again, that kind of system thinking, reverse engineering, that has helped you to get to this point of having made those hard choices, been in the unknown, had the faith? Is there anything else that you would say, this is what helped me make those choices?
Yeah. There's a few things that come to mind. I'm sure there's even more than I can think of right now, but there's a few things come to mind. Number one is, this was a reflection I had from a really close friend of mine. And I was talking to him about, releasing this thing and the thing that in 2021, and being worried, like, well, what's the next thing going to be? And like, I'm not sure. And he reflected to me, he said, he knows I'm a rapper and that I love rap music. And he said, to me, man, you're Jay-Z. And I'm like, well, I mean, thank you. Does that mean I get to date Beyonce? That's fantastic. But what does that actually mean? And he said, you're a hit maker. If you make one hit, you'll make another hit. And it's actually really funny because it's, Jay-Z has a song that I love. He has this line in one of his songs where he says, put me anywhere on God's green earth and I'll triple my worth. And there's a level of, if you take out the, the braggadocio kind of nature of it, it feels very much like I know I'm going to be okay. In fact, I know I'm going to thrive no matter what environment I'm put in. And so remembering that I am connected to source, and so I can't possibly take credit for the things that I've done, not fully, but that I always have that co-creation available to me when I'm in the right level of consciousness, when I'm not taking myself too seriously or whatever else. So I think that's a big part of it. And the other part is really more a function of knowing that I am supported in this realm as well. So we're talking about like being supported in that realm in the universe, but this realm as well. And a story that comes to mind, I have a group of friends that was brought together by one of our friends who passed away, Sean Stevenson. I don't know if you knew him, the little 3-foot tall guy in a wheelchair. He's a speaker and stuff. And so we had a friend group together. And when he passed, we decided to keep the friend group together. And all entrepreneurs, businesses range from 500,000 a year to like 10 million a year, right? And it's like 6 or 7 guys, small group. And I say that number for a particular reason. So we're sitting around and we're talking about kind of our deepest fears about things that could happen in our lives. And the one thing that was constant across the board, no matter how much money the people in the room made, was the fear of going broke, was the fear of running out of money, of being broke, being homeless, being whatever. And it was just crazy, right? It's like, wow, no matter what level you're at, that these things still exist. And so one of the guys said, I'm curious, if we go around the circle right now, if I lost everything, this guy saying this, if I lost everything, if I lost every penny that I had, I want to go one by one and ask you, would you let me sleep on your couch for a month? And so he goes one by one. And of course, the first guy goes, yeah, of course. And the second guy goes, duh. And I'm like, yeah, of course you can. Like, we go across. He goes, so basically, all of us just proved that if we lost everything, since there's 7 people in this group, we would have 6 months where we could live and have no problem at all. We would be supported. And there was something about really taking it down to that first order principle, like the basic foundational thing of, if I lose the money, I'm going to be alone, I'm going to be broke, I'm going to be on my own, like all these things. And to realize, like, no, you're actually much more supported than you think you are. That also gave me the energy to make some of these choices. Like, God forbid the worst case scenario happen, I got 6 months of couch surfing that I can do. And I guarantee I would create something in those 6 months that would get me back on my feet. So those two things are what occurred to me in this moment.
Oh, I love that so much. That's really brought up emotion for me. It brings to mind, I did a post earlier that said something like, here's me misquoting myself now.
You got to love that when you paraphrase yourself. That's fantastic.
I'm better at quoting Jung than I am myself. It said something like, if you think, sometimes when you think you want coaching, you actually need therapy. And sometimes when you think you need therapy, you actually need the land, the village, and spirit. And then I said something like, and actually that goes for all of us. And I love that one way or another, all those 3 things, the land, the village, and spirit, have all kind of like been present in this conversation. And, you know, so easy to forget the importance of those things. And just, yeah, I'm feeling so much gratitude that's, you know, what you found. It can again be so easy to think that, you know, some people are beyond the need for those things. And yet we all do need them.
Yeah, it's the fundamental things that show up in our lives, and I see it more and more. And it really hit home for me last week. I had a guy reach out to me who I've met twice. He's a restaurant consultant in North Carolina. He was consulting with one of my friends' restaurants when I lived there, and so I met him. Super nice guy. I met him like literally 2 or 3 times max, and this was 6 years ago probably. He messages me the week before last. And he says, hey, man, I know we haven't talked in a while, but, you know, I've read your book and I followed your content, and I'm going through some stuff. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to have a conversation with me just to kind of unpack some stuff. And I said, yeah, of course, man. So we have a call last week. And it turns out this lovely 40-year-old man who has a 9-year-old daughter was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer. He has 6 months to live. He already has like lost use of his left arm and his left leg. He's laying in a bed on Zoom talking to me. His entire life has changed, can't work anymore, like all these things. And you know what he wanted coaching on? He wanted coaching on setting boundaries with his family. And I thought to myself, if that isn't the craziest thing in the world, that what he's going through right now, his biggest concern is setting boundaries with family. And the reason I bring that up is just to really normalize the conversation for everybody listening, that anything you're struggling with that you think people at a certain level don't struggle with anymore, this is a perfect example that we literally are all the exact same person. We are all dealing with the exact same thing. It shows up in different flavors, but we're so much more alike than we are different.
Yeah. Oh, Jason, this has been amazing. This really has been amazing.
I've loved talking to you. It's been way too long.
It really has
been fantastic.
Yeah, we won't leave it so long. In fact, we may even, whilst you're over here, get to connect, or soon anyway, in person, which would be
awesome.
Gorgeous.
That would be fantastic.
But for now, where can listeners find out more about you and your, well, I was trying to think of a superlative to name your work, and I don't have one.
Good. You don't have to. It's, I'm still trying to think of a superlative too. It's totally fine. Yeah, I hang out a lot on Instagram is kind of where I hang out the most. So I'm the Jason Goldberg on Instagram. Jason Goldberg was taken, so I got the most pretentious name I possibly could. So it's the Jason Goldberg. I've been thinking about changing it to a Jason Goldberg just for the hell of it, but I'm going to leave it as the Jason Goldberg for now. So yeah, that's where I post all my stuff, and we can continue the combo there.
One of the many Jason Goldbergs. I find it interesting. The reason, just to say this, it wasn't an insult that I couldn't think of an adjective. It was like, I feel as though there's been a kind of greater depth of you revealed in this conversation. And as I kind of went to name your work, I was just like, I feel like I'm almost like, I don't know anymore. Like it feels as though, I mean, a really good way.
I'll take it. I mean, I tend to call myself a spiritual pragmatist, right? So I'm very much about higher power and spirit. And I also understand that I have to work in the 3D world. And those two things need to have equal airtime.
Yeah. Hostages and pizzas. Raffle dogs.
Big takeaway here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here. You're amazing. And I appreciate you having me on. Again, I glutton for punishment. Thank you.
Again, you will be back soon.